The cave was not on our map. It was late in the war on a Pacific island that looked small from a ship and endless once your boots sank into it. The heat pressed down like a hand that never lifted. Sweat soaked the webbing until it felt like it belonged to someone else. Salt dried on the lips and turned every breath into a scrape. The jungle did not just surround you, it erased you. The moment you stopped moving, it swallowed sound, swallowed tracks, swallowed certainty. That morning, the light came gray through smoke and sea haze. The ocean sat beyond the trees like a sheet of metal, calm and indifferent. It was the kind of calm that made the body nervous, because on those islands the quiet never meant safety. It meant the enemy was close enough to hear you breathe. We were clearing a short stretch of slope before the next unit moved up. That was the language the orders used, simple and clean, as if the ground was a hallway and not a trap. The Japanese did not defend like a line on a map. They defended like a hidden system. Holes, tunnels, crawl spaces. A ridge could look empty and still be full of men, waiting inside the rock. I had been moving with my squad long enough that fear had stopped shouting. It had learned to whisper. It lived in small details. A vine that hung too straight. A patch of dirt that looked disturbed. A fly that did not land where flies should land. The slope was coral and broken stone under a thin skin of soil. In some places, the coral cut through boots like glass. In others, the mud pulled at your feet as if it wanted you down on your knees. The smell was wet plants and rot, and underneath it the sharp metal smell that always meant old blood somewhere nearby. We found the cave because the jungle did not want it. Vines tried to cover it, but they grew wrong around the opening, as if they were afraid of the dark inside. The rock face was scuffed, scraped, and polished by too many shoulders passing through. The dirt at the mouth was packed flat, not by rain, but by repeated steps. A shadow like that should have been cool, but when I leaned closer, I felt warm air pushing out, faint and steady, the breath of something living under stone. My stomach tightened so hard it felt like a cramp. Caves were not just holes, they were decisions. A tree line could be watched, a ridge could be shelled. A cave stole all those options. You could not see inside, you could not know its depth. You could not know if it ended in 10 steps or ran into a whole underground world. You could not know if the men inside were wounded, starving, and ready to surrender, or calm, stocked, and ready to pull you into the dark. We had orders about caves. The words were simple, but the meaning was heavy. Do not rush them. Do not crowd the entrance. Do not assume silence means empty. Do not stand in front of a black hole the way you would stand in front of a door. So we did what we always did. We treated it like it was loaded. I signaled for the men behind me to hold. Nobody spoke. On those islands, talking felt like ringing a bell. We spread slightly, not enough to lose each other, just enough that one grenade could not take us all at once. My eyes kept returning to the cave mouth. I wanted to stare into it until it blinked first. The problem was that caves never blinked. There was a small object near the entrance, half buried in dirt and leaf scraps. At first I thought it was a rock. Then the shape clicked into place. A helmet. Not ours. It lay upside down like a bowl. The rim was cracked. A strap trailed out from under it, stiff with dried mud. That helmet did not look dropped. It looked placed, like a sign. That was the first shock. Not loud, not dramatic, just a cold certainty that someone had been here recently enough to leave a message, and they had left it where it could be seen. I did not touch it. I watched it the way you watch a snake. The strap could be tied to a wire. The helmet could cover something. Anything could be a trick if the person who said it had time and patience. A few meters to the side, the ground had a narrow strip where the leaves looked slightly rearranged, as if someone had swept them. My eyes followed that strip. It ended at a thin line in the dirt, almost invisible, like a hair laid across the ground. A tripwire. I felt my throat go dry. In that instant, I understood something that the body learns before the mind catches up. The cave was not just occupied. It was defended with care. Whoever was inside did not want to fight out in the open. They wanted us right here, close, crowded, panicking. They wanted the jungle to hold our arms while the wire did the work. I raised my hand again, slow, and the men froze harder than they already were. One wrong step, one stumble, one boot catching a root, and the slope would turn into a pile of bodies before a single shot was fired. The air felt louder. My own pulse was louder than the jungle. A small movement flickered in the darkness of the cave mouth, so slight that part of me wanted to pretend it did not happen. A shadow inside the shadow, like someone shifting weight. It was not a full silhouette. It was just enough to confirm that the dark was watching back. Then the second shock hit, fast and physical. A sharp crack snapped somewhere uphill, close enough that the sound punched into the skull. Not a long exchange, not a warning burst. One clean, single shot. A fraction of a second later, something hard slapped the rock near the cave entrance. Dust puffed out. Tiny chips of stone jumped. The bullet had hit close enough to throw grit into the air, close enough that I could taste it. My legs did not move, but my body reacted anyway. The shoulders tightened, the jaw locked, the lungs stopped for a beat, then restarted too fast. Whoever fired that shot was not shooting to kill. Not yet. They were shooting to pin us, to make us drop where we stood, to make us bunch up, to make us forget the wire. The cave had teeth, the jungle had hands, and now the ridge had a gun. For a moment, nobody moved. The world shrank to a few meters of ground, to the cave mouth, to that thin line in the dirt. The kind of fear that comes then is not screaming fear. It is a cold calculation. If we run, we trip the wire. If we stay, we get picked off. If we go forward, we go into the dark. I lowered myself one careful step at a time, placing my boots like I was walking on glass. My eyes stayed on the ground. I did not blink. I traced the wire with my gaze until it disappeared under leaves. Then I saw the problem. The wire did not run toward the cave. It ran away from it, into thicker brush, toward a cluster of roots. That meant the explosive was not in the cave. It was outside, buried, meant to blow the entrance area apart. It was meant to kill whoever tried to take cover. It was meant to punish instinct. My hand stayed steady, but inside I felt something rise that I had not felt in weeks. Anger. Not heroic anger, not movie anger. The ugly kind. The kind that comes when you realize someone has planned your death like a routine. We backed off without turning our backs. Slowly, carefully, keeping distance. The cave did not move. The wire did not move. The darkness stayed open like a mouth that knew it had time. We shifted into a narrow pocket of ground nearby, a shallow dip where coral and dirt met a small stand of stunted trees. It was not safe, just less exposed. The cave stayed behind us, close enough that I could still feel it, as if the rock itself carried a pressure. That is where we found the body. He was partly covered by leaves and broken branches, as if the island tried to hide him quickly. His uniform blended with the earth, but the shape of him did not. A human body has a weight that the world around it does not. Even when it is still, it looks wrong in the landscape. He was young, younger than my mind wanted to admit. His face was turned slightly toward the ground. His mouth was open just a little, not in a scream, just caught mid-breath. One side of his head was dark with dried blood that had soaked into the dirt. There was no rifle in his hands. That detail hit hard because it suggested he had been stripped, searched, handled. Someone had been here after he fell. Someone had enough control to take what mattered and leave the rest. I approached slowly because bodies on those islands could still kill you. A grenade could be tucked under an arm. A wire could be tied to a finger. The dead could be used like bait. I scanned the ground around him first, then his belt, then his pockets. I looked for anything that did not belong. Nothing obvious. That did not mean safe. It just meant the trap, if there was one, was smarter than obvious. My training told me to search him for documents, not trophies. Information. A map fragment. A unit note. A clue that explained why the cave behind us was built like a machine. My fingers slipped into the inside of his jacket and found a folded piece of paper, tight and protected, softened by sweat and time. It was not stiff like an order sheet. It was thin, worn, carried. I froze with it halfway out. There was a strange feeling then, like stepping over a line, like for the first time that day, the danger was not just about my body, it was about my mind. I pulled the paper free. The edges were frayed. The creases were deep. Someone had unfolded and refolded it so many times that the folds had become permanent, like scars. I did not read it. Not yet. I just stared at it because it felt too personal to exist in a place like this. It felt like the one thing on the island that was not meant to be a weapon. There were characters on it that I could not understand, but I could see the pressure of the pen, the pauses, the places where the hand had pressed harder. Whoever wrote it had meant it. Whoever carried it had held it close for a long time. For a moment, the cave and the wire and the bullet impact behind us all faded, and all I could think was that this dead man had once been alive enough to care about words. Then the fear returned, sharper, because paper like that did not travel alone. It came from somewhere. It was going somewhere. It belonged to someone who might be inside that cave, or somewhere upslope behind a rifle, watching to see what we would do next. I folded the paper exactly as I found it, tighter, as if making it smaller could make it less powerful. I slid it into my pocket, not as a trophy, not as proof, but like contraband that could get me in trouble with my own side if they knew I had it. My hands moved on their own. My mind lagged behind. I looked back toward the cave through the trees. The opening was still there, dark and low, forcing a man to bow. And from somewhere near it, the jungle made the faintest sound, a soft shift of leaves, the kind of sound that meant a living body was moving slowly, carefully, close enough to hear the paper in my pocket if paper could make noise. I did not know what the letter said. I only knew that I had just taken something from the enemy that did not feel like victory. And whatever was about to happen next was going to be personal. I did not read the letter right away. I told myself it was because we were still in danger, because anything I did with my head down could get me killed. That was the clean reason. The one that sounded like discipline. The truth was uglier. Part of me was afraid that if I unfolded it, it would stop being paper and start being a voice. The jungle around us stayed tense and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel like it is aimed at you. We kept moving in short, careful shifts, never stepping where we had not looked, never relaxing long enough to forget the cave. The tripwire I had seen kept replaying in my mind. The enemy was not just hiding. He was shaping us, hurting us, making our instincts work against us. My pocket felt heavier than it should have. The letter pressed against my thigh with each step. A thin rectangle, but it carried weight, the way a photograph carries weight. Not in grams, in meaning. I kept touching it without meaning to, checking that it was still there. That made me angry at myself. It was an enemy letter. It should have been nothing. It should have been just another object in a war full of objects. But it had already gotten under my skin, and I had not even opened it. We circled back to a safer patch of ground. If anything on that island could be called safe. A shallow dip behind broken rock where the slope blocked the line of fire from uphill. The air smelled like damp earth and old smoke. Flies drifted in lazy circles and then vanished, as if even they knew to stay away from certain places. Men worked in automatic routines, checking ammunition, wiping sweat from eyes, looking at the tree line and pretending they were calm. Nobody spoke much. When men talk too much in combat, it is usually because they are trying to push fear out through their mouths. When they go quiet, it means fear has moved deeper. My hands shook once, just once, and I hid it by adjusting my webbing. That was when I knew I needed to read the letter, not because I wanted to, because I could not stop wondering. And the wondering was worse than the truth. I crouched lower behind a rock and pulled the paper out. The folds were tight. The paper was soft, almost cloth-like from sweat. The edges were darkened where fingers had held it again and again. When I opened it, the smell surprised me. Not a strong smell, just a faint trace of oil and salt and something old, like a book that has been closed too long. The writing was in Japanese characters I could not read, but there were small marks and numbers in a different style, as if someone had tried to make the message readable to someone else, or as if the writer had practiced writing a foreign language and then given up. Some lines were darker, pressed hard. Some were lighter, as if the hand had weakened. The page did not look like an official document. It looked like a private thing that had been folded and unfolded in the dark. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, feeling stupid. I had expected a secret, a map, a code, a warning, something that fit the war, something that made sense in a battlefield mind. This did not fit. Then I noticed one small detail that made my stomach turn. A tiny smear of dried blood on the edge of the paper, right where a thumb would naturally press it closed. Not a big stain, just a fingerprint worth of brown red. The letter had been held by a wounded hand, or held while someone else was bleeding. The paper had been close to pain. I put my thumb over the smear, and it felt like covering a mouth. I was not a translator, but men learn patterns when they stare at something long enough. I saw repetition. I saw the same characters returning like a heartbeat. I saw one set of symbols at the top that might have been a name, and another at the bottom that might have been a signature, the kind of structure that letters have everywhere, no matter the language. Hello, this is me. This is what happened. This is what I feel. Do not forget me. I told myself again that it was enemy writing, and therefore it meant nothing. Then I realized the letter had been carefully protected. A man does not keep a useless paper against his body through marches, through heat, through rain, through hunger, through fear, unless it is more important than food, unless it is more important than comfort, unless it is more important than looking tough in front of other men. I felt something shift inside my chest, a small pressure that did not release. Behind me, one of my men moved. I heard boots scrape lightly. Instinct jumped up in my spine like electricity. For a moment, I thought someone was coming to see what I was doing. I folded the letter fast and hid it again. That reaction answered a question I had not wanted to ask. I was already treating the paper like a secret from my own side. I sat there and listened to the jungle. The ocean was somewhere beyond the ridge, but you could not see it from where we were. You could only hear it sometimes, a distant hush between wind and leaves. It felt like the island had separated us from the rest of the world, like we were inside a closed box and the lid had been nailed down. I needed help to read it. That was obvious. But asking for help meant admitting I cared. There was a man in our company who spoke some Japanese. Not fluent, not elegant, but enough to pick out basic meaning. He had been raised in Hawaii, and he carried his knowledge the way some men carry scars, always aware that other people are watching. He did not advertise it. He did not make jokes about it. He kept it quiet because on those islands, anything connected to Japan could make a man a target for suspicion even among his own. I found him later when the movement slowed, and we were briefly regrouping. He was cleaning his rifle with the calm patience of a man who has learned that anxiety does not fix anything. I sat down near him without making a show of it. My heart was beating too hard for such a simple action. I did not want to speak. Words felt loud, but I had to. I asked him quietly if he could look at something. He did not ask questions right away. He just looked at my face, then at my hands, and he understood that whatever I had was not a joke. I pulled the letter out and opened it between us, shielding it from others with my body. The paper fluttered slightly in the moving air and then settled. His eyes went across the lines slowly. I watched his expression change in small steps. First it was neutral, then it tightened. Then it softened in a way that made me uneasy, because softness in war feels like a mistake. He traced a line with his finger, but did not touch the paper, as if he was afraid of disrespecting it. He swallowed once. He looked up at me, and then back down again. The first thing he translated was not tactical, not a warning, not a plan. It was a greeting. It was the kind of greeting that assumes the reader will live long enough to read it. Then he translated the next part, and my throat went dry. The letter was from a young Japanese soldier to his mother. He wrote about the sea. He wrote about being hungry. He wrote about missing home. He wrote about trying to be brave. He wrote that he did not know if he would return. He wrote that he was sorry for the worry he caused. He wrote that he had seen things that made him feel old inside. There were no boasts, no hatred, no talk of glory, no lines about killing Americans. There was only a steady, careful attempt to sound calm, because a son does not want to send fear to his mother, even when he is drowning in it himself. The Hawaiian soldier did not read every line. He skipped parts that were too personal, and I felt that he was right to do it. But the parts he did read were enough. My mind tried to resist. It tried to push the words away and replace them with the enemy I knew. The enemy that shot from caves and wired the ground and waited for you to step wrong. My mind wanted the Japanese to stay faceless, because faceless enemies are easier to kill. But the letter had given him a face without showing his face at all. I looked back toward the cave through the leaves, and something in me faltered for the first time in months. Not my will to survive, not my loyalty. Something deeper, the way I had been taught to hate. The tripwire, the bullet crack, the hidden movement in the cave mouth. All of it had been pure danger, clean danger. You can respond to danger with action. This was different. This was danger to the story I had been living inside. I took the letter back and folded it carefully, copying the folds as if they mattered, as if the paper could feel disrespect. My fingers were clumsy. I had trouble making the creases line up. That frustrated me in a childish way. and the frustration turned into shame, because it was not my letter. It was never meant for me. I had pulled it from a dead man and made it mine for a few minutes, and now it sat in my pocket like a piece of stolen skin. I wanted to hand it back to the body we had left behind, but the body was already part of the jungle again. We did not have the luxury of ceremonies. We did not have the luxury of returning anything. We had only the next hour, the next meter, the next breath. I stood up and checked my rifle the way I always did. Metal, oil, weight, familiar certainty. The weapon did not care what was written on paper. The weapon did not care about mothers. The weapon did not care about hunger. The weapon cared only about pressure and direction, and the moment a finger decided. That was when I understood what the letter had done. It had not made me soft. It had made me divided, and division in combat is its own kind of wound. We began moving again, because the island never waited for you to finish thinking. The cave still sat behind us, like a mouth that had already tasted blood. The jungle ahead was still full of places for a man to disappear. But now, every time I imagined the enemy in the darkness, I also imagined a mother somewhere far away, waiting for a letter that would never arrive. And that thought followed me forward into the green like a shadow I could not outrun. I put the letter back in my pocket and tried to become the same man again. It did not work. We moved forward, because that is what you do in a war. You move until you cannot. The island did not care about what a paper said. The island only cared about distance and angles, and whether your next step landed on dirt or on a wire. The trees stood close together like bars. The coral under the soil waited like broken glass. Every few meters the ground changed, and every change felt like a question. The cave stayed behind us, but it stayed in my head too. A low black opening breathing warm air, a place that did not need daylight to kill. I kept thinking about the helmet near the entrance and the thin wire in the dirt. It had been planned. It had been patient. The enemy had shaped the ground the way a hunter shapes a trap. The letter had changed the shape of the enemy at the exact wrong time. I tried to fix it by forcing myself into routine. I checked my rifle, I checked my ammunition, I checked the spacing between men. I watched the tree line, I listened for movement. I told myself that this was the only way to stay alive, and that whatever I felt about a dead man and his mother did not belong here. Then the island tested me. The next time we took fire, it was not dramatic at first. It was the same pattern we had seen for weeks. A single shot from cover, then another, then a pause long enough to make you lift your head, then a shot aimed where your head had been a second before. The enemy was trying to make us react the way he wanted. Panic forward, panic back, panic into open ground, panic into the wire. We dropped low and spread out. Dirt pressed into my elbows. Sweat ran into my eyes and stung. I tasted coral dust and old smoke. Somewhere to my left, a man fired 2 rounds and stopped, careful not to waste. Somewhere ahead, leaves trembled without wind. I aimed at a patch of darkness between roots and rock where the shots seemed to be coming from. This was the moment that should have been simple. The target was not a face. It was not a person. It was a hole, a shadow, an empty space that happened to contain an enemy rifle. That is how you survive. You do not imagine too much. You do not give the darkness a name. You turn it into a problem and solve it. My finger took up slack on the trigger, and suddenly the letter in my pocket felt like it was burning through the cloth. Not because it was physically hot, but because my mind had attached a human life to the shape I was about to erase. The moment I pressed harder, my brain filled the shadow with a mother, a greeting, hunger, a son trying to sound calm. It was irrational. It was dangerous. It was automatic. I hate how honest this part is even now. I did not stop because I became kind. I stopped because for a fraction of a second I could not choose which story I lived in. In that fraction of a second the enemy fired again. The round snapped through leaves and hit the rock near my head. Stone dust exploded in my face. A chip of coral cut my cheek. The pain was bright and immediate, and it wiped my thoughts clean, the way cold water wipes sleep. That was the third shock, and it was the one I needed. The island reminded me that hesitation does not make you moral. It makes you dead. My body moved before my mind finished apologizing. I fired into the dark. 2 shots, then a third, controlling the recoil, placing the rounds where the muzzle flash had been. The sound was louder than I expected in the jungle. It bounced off rock and trees and returned to me as an echo, as if the island mocked every action. The firing from that spot stopped. That should have been relief. It was not. I did not feel proud. I did not feel clean. I felt the same divided pressure in my chest, but now it had teeth. I had killed a man I could not see, and I could not tell if the letter in my pocket made that harder or worse. We pushed forward because stopping would have been suicide. The jungle thinned briefly into a broken strip of ground where the rock face rose and the trees stepped back. There were more openings in the stone, not full caves, but holes that could hide a man. The Japanese did not need to be everywhere. They only needed to be in the right places, the places that forced you to slow down, to bunch up, to think. We moved carefully around each opening, never trusting a shadow. We kept our spacing, but the ground narrowed it again and again until the distance between men felt like a promise that could not be kept. That is when we found the boy. Not a child, but close enough that the word felt true in my mouth. He was crouched behind a low rock, holding a rifle that looked too long for his arms. His uniform was filthy and soaked. His face was thin. His eyes were wide, fixed, not like a man trying to kill you, but like a man trying to decide if he is already dead. He did not fire. He just stared. Everything that happened next took only a few seconds, but those seconds stretched inside me and never shrank again. One of our men shouted a command, quick and sharp. The boy flinched as if the sound hit him physically. He started to raise the rifle, not smoothly, not confidently, more like a reflex, a motion that had been drilled into his muscles until it happened even when his mind was gone. My rifle was already up. The sight was already on his chest. And then, for one sickening instant, I saw it. A folded piece of paper tucked into his breast pocket, the edge of it visible, protected close to his heart the same way the other letter had been protected, the same careful fold, the same worn corner. It felt like the island had placed it there on purpose, like it wanted me to understand something and suffer for understanding it. I did not have time to think. I fired. The boy fell backward, the rifle slipping from his hands. His body hit the ground with a dull sound that was not loud enough for what it meant. His eyes stayed open. His mouth moved once without sound. Then the jungle took him again, not by covering him, but by making him part of the scenery in a heartbeat. The shooting stopped. The air went quiet except for breathing. I stood there with my rifle still pointed at him, and I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had been tricked into stepping on something he could not undo. I walked closer, slow, scanning for wires out of habit, scanning for movement out of fear. There was none. He was dead. The paper in his pocket was still there, pinned under the fabric. For a moment, I stared at it and felt a tightness behind my eyes that I refused to release. Crying in combat is not just weakness. It is distraction. Distraction gets other men killed. So I did not cry. I reached down and pulled the paper free with 2 fingers, as if touching it too much would spread something onto my skin. It was another letter. I did not open it. I did not need to. I could already imagine the shape of it. A greeting. A mother. A promise that could not be kept. The careful effort to sound brave when bravery is gone. I folded it again and put it with the first letter in my pocket. Now there were 2. Now it was not an accident. It was a pattern. The Hawaiian soldier saw me do it. He did not speak. His face tightened, and I knew he understood exactly why I did not want anyone else to see. Because once you admit the enemy carries letters like you do, once you admit he is writing to someone like you do, it becomes harder to keep the war simple enough to function. We kept moving. The day stretched on with the same brutal rhythm. Short bursts forward, sudden stillness, sweat, dust, the sound of insects that did not care about gunfire, the smell of damp rot and smoke, the sense that the island was built to exhaust you until you made a mistake. Late in the afternoon, the sky dimmed slightly, not from sunset, but from smoke thickening over the ridge. Somewhere farther down the line, someone had used explosives on another cave. The blast had rolled through the jungle like distant thunder. The smell of blasting powder drifted in waves, sharp and bitter, and it mixed with the salt air until the whole world smelled like burnt metal. We passed a shallow crater where the rock had been fractured, and I saw bits of fabric and wood and something else scattered near the edge. I did not look too long. Looking too long turns you into a statue. But that night, when we finally stopped moving and the darkness settled in, I could not escape what I had done. Night on those islands is not gentle. It drops fast. The jungle becomes a wall. The sounds change. You hear dripping. You hear distant surf. You hear your own breath too loud. You hear small movements that might be nothing or might be everything. Men tried to sleep in short pieces. Some cleaned weapons. Some stared into the dark. Some whispered prayers that they would deny later. I sat with my back against a rock and pulled out the first letter again. I could not read it. I could not turn it into clear meaning, but I could see the structure of a life in it. I could see the effort of the hand. I could see the blood smear where a thumb had pressed it closed. I could see the places where the writer paused, where the line broke slightly, where the pen lifted and returned. I imagined his mother holding it. I imagined her reading it by lamplight. I imagined her smiling at the greeting and then swallowing fear as she read the rest. I imagined her folding it again and again until the creases became permanent. And I imagined the letter never reaching her, because it was here, because I had it, because her son was dead in a place she would never see, under trees she could not name, under a sky that did not belong to her. The war had taken many things from me by then: friends, sleep, any belief that the world was fair. But this was different. This was theft that felt personal. I understood something in that night that I did not want to understand. The Japanese were not just fighting with rifles and caves and wires. They were fighting with distance, with isolation, with the knowledge that nobody would ever come for them. They were fighting inside a story where death was expected, where surrender was shame, where a letter might be the only soft thing a man allowed himself. And I had stepped into that story without being invited. I folded the letter carefully, matching the creases exactly, and put it back with the second one. I sat there in the dark with two enemy letters against my heart, and I knew I had crossed a line that did not exist on any map. I also knew something else, something that scared me more than gunfire. Tomorrow I would have to aim again. Tomorrow I would have to decide in less than a second whether a shadow was a man. And now I would always know that somewhere behind the shadow there might be a mother waiting for words that never arrive. I stayed awake until the jungle began to lighten at the edge of the sky, and the letters felt heavier and heavier, as if paper could turn into stone over the course of a single night.